and the medical examiner said all of these injuries to the neck were due to strangulation. All of these injuries, according to the medical examiner, occurred prior to death.
But at the end of the day, we had sufficient probable cause to charge this individual with arrest for homicide, for the unlawful killing of another human being with malice.
A man's body was discovered wrapped in blankets and bound with duct tape outside of a Massachusetts hospital, and prosecutors say this was no accident. Now, a man stands accused of murder, with prosecutors pointing to severe injuries, alleged attempts to conceal the body, and chilling digital searches as evidence that this was a homicide. It's time to discuss the eerie details of this case with Massachusetts criminal defense attorney William Korman. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, so this story begins with a chilling and very unique scene outside of South Shore Hospital in Weymouth, Massachusetts. This is August 23rd, and that is when staff discovered a man's body wrapped in blankets, bound with duct tape, and already beyond saving inside of a black Honda Civic that was parked right by the ER entrance. And for days, investigators worked to figure out how this man, 27-year-old Declan Perry, ended up dead in that car. And as the investigation unfolded, there were a lot of strange details that began to emerge. There were bizarre Google searches. There was a late-night trip to obtain drugs. There were neighbors who say they helped move what they were told was a hockey mannequin. Turns out that was not the case. And now, the man that police say is responsible, 42-year-old Christopher Karen, has appeared in court for the first time. And at the center of this case is Perry, who is a talented chef from Portland, Maine, remembered by friends, co-workers as loved, as gifted, but also, and this is a part of this case, someone who struggled with fentanyl addiction. He had traveled to Massachusetts in late August, apparently to meet Karen, a casual acquaintance, and what prosecutors allege happened next was a night of drugs, violence, and an attempt to cover it all up, ending with Perry's body abandoned outside of a hospital. Now, before we get to the courtroom, I want to rewind and trace the timeline here, because how did police go from finding a body in a car to charging someone with murder, right? So this case really begins a little while before this. We go to August 12th. That is when, according to prosecutors, Perry began texting Karen, who, again, this acquaintance. The two eventually made plans for Perry to travel to Massachusetts to meet Karen on August 22nd, but when Perry apparently arrived, prosecutors say Karen facilitated a sale of drugs, cocaine and fentanyl, allegedly warning Perry, you gotta go easy on this bleep. Now, later that night, at around 11:40 p.m., Karen reportedly made a Google search for 7-Eleven Narcan, and then apparently began messaging a female friend a little after 1 a.m., asking her to bring the drug to his home. Now, if you're not familiar with Narcan, it is a medicine that essentially reverses the effects of an opioid overdose. So that woman arrives at Karen's home at around 3 a.m. She later told investigators that she went into Karen's basement bedroom, and that is when she found Perry unconscious on the floor. And together, they administered 3 doses of Narcan. Now, Perry didn't wake up, but his heart was still beating, and he was still breathing. So now, this woman says she eventually fell asleep, only to be awoken around 7 a.m., and that is when she found Perry dead. She later told investigators that she pleaded with Karen to call an ambulance, but he refused, apparently fearing that his mother and grandmother, who lived upstairs, they would kick him out of the house if they discovered what had happened. So that same morning, Karen allegedly Googled, when you die, how long before you poop and pee yourself? Now, investigators allege that Karen then attempted to move Perry's body, and doing this using a detached interior door as kind of like this makeshift stretcher. And at one point, he apparently places the body into this large storage bin, and with the woman's help, pushed it upstairs. Now, she told police that the body never fell, it never hit anything, and she didn't see any drugs or paraphernalia in the room, which is important when you talk about what the injuries were on the body. Now, outside, Karen and the woman tried to get Perry's body into this black Honda Civic, and neighbors at this condo complex, they noticed them struggling. They offered to help, but this is where things get really strange. We're going to get to that. But first, to help me break down what we're talking about so far, and we have a lot more to get into, I want to bring on a special guest to help me do all this. I want to bring on criminal defense attorney William Korman, William, good to see you. This is your neck of the woods here, Massachusetts. How do prosecutors typically prove an intent to kill here, where you're talking about complicating factors of drug use, right? I mean, talk to us about what you think of this.
Well, in this particular case, I think it was more than just drug use. I think obviously there has to be some sort of autopsy on the body to determine whether or not this gentleman died of a drug overdose or if there were signs of a violent struggle. So whatever that autopsy report is, that's key. It may not even be that complicated. The police themselves, after looking at the body during the course of the investigation, they probably were able to tell pretty early on whether or not somebody died of a drug overdose or whether or not there were signs of a violent struggle.
This is a big episode that we wanted to bring you here on Sidebar, and I got to call out our sponsor who helped make this possible, Morgan & Morgan. This is America's largest injury law firm. This is a firm with over 1,000 attorneys. You know why they're so big? Because they win a lot. They have recovered over $25 billion for more than 500,000 clients. Think about that. In the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. Out in Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. Another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions of dollars, why not just start a claim and fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar by clicking the link below or scanning the QR code on screen. And I'm going to get to the apparent injuries in a minute, but the digital evidence, right? The Google search history, text messages with this woman, how important is that for this case?
Well, here we go again, right? I mean, on Law&Crime, you folks talk all the time about the digital footprint that individuals leave. And this is yet another example of a series of cases over and over and over again. The Diddy case, the forensic evidence. The Karen Reed case, the forensic evidence. All of these digital footprints that individuals are leaving all over cyberspace certainly helps investigators connect the dots and determine exactly what happened and when.
Is there anything, a way the defense can explain this away? And they say that these searches, I mean, I think it might be tough to say that the defendant didn't make them, but to say there was another explanation for why he was searching this?
Sure. I mean, he can certainly try, but at that stage of the game, I suppose it depends on what the time of death is. If this individual died 7 hours earlier and the defendant is searching how long before somebody poops themselves after you die, that's a lot different than someone who's making that Google search 10 or 15 minutes prior to death. I suppose as a defense attorney, I would try to say, I'm trying to determine, or my client's trying to determine whether or not this individual has actually passed away, or if they're just in the throes of a drug overdose and exactly where we are. But again, I think there's a lot that we still don't know about the timing of everything, and that's when the digital forensic evidence will be key.
This witness, this woman who is allegedly involved in aiding or responding to the victim and the aftermath of, allegedly trying to move the body, how does that affect the prosecution's case, and is that something that the defense can use as well?
Well, she becomes the prosecutor's key witness. It sounds like she was there prior to the gentleman passing away, and it sounds like she was there after he died. According to what I've read, she is basically begging Karen to call an ambulance, to do something, and he's refusing for a variety of reasons. So she's the government's star witness in this case, without a doubt.
So let's go to this search warrant, because according to a search warrant that was obtained by Boston 25 News, the discovery of Declan Perry's body unfolded in quite a chilling way. Around 2 p.m. on August 23rd, a hooded man walked into South Shore Hospital's ER, told a nurse that someone in his car needed help, and then just walked away, abandoning the car at the hospital. Now, a unit manager went outside, found the black Honda Civic with main plates, and inside was Perry's body, shirtless, wrapped in blankets, bound with duct tape. He was already in rigor mortis. There was no pulse. He was pronounced dead at 2:15 p.m. And after leaving the hospital, authorities say, Karen allegedly stopped at a Cumberland Farms, bought a few items, waited for an Uber, and then returned to Scituate. Now, here's where the story, by the way, turns even stranger, because 2 neighbors later told police that they had helped Karen move a large, heavy object into the Honda. Now, at the time, they didn't know it was a body, and he apparently didn't tell them it was a body, okay? So instead, Karen claimed that this was a a hockey mannequin that was drained of water. So one neighbor, by the way, actually thought they saw human flesh. Another, and this is really eerie, recalled joking that the object felt like a dead body. Those witnesses, they came forward after seeing the Honda with the main plates featured on the news. And when police searched inside Karen's unit, they found red-brown stains on the carpet, the couch, the detached door. They also discovered a black belt on the basement floor and recovered a damaged black storage bin from a nearby dumpster, along with mail that was addressed to Karen's grandmother. So for a week, Karen remained free. But on August 30th, he turned himself in to the Scituate Police Department, and 2 days later, he appeared in Hingham District Court for his arraignment, where prosecutors detailed the extensive injuries that Perry had sustained, revealing why authorities believe they are dealing with a homicide and not, an accidental overdose. Now, we're going to get to that, but first, William, let's go back here. Okay, lot to take away from this. First, is there something to be said for the fact, if we take these allegations as true, drops the body off at the hospital and then turns himself in? How is that something that defense attorneys can use? It may not negate murder. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I don't know. You tell me.
Well, I suppose, again, timing is everything in this particular case. So is this gentleman going to be able to say that he was concerned about his friend and drove him to the hospital? Well, absolutely not, because he's wrapped the body in some sort of blanket and surrounded it with duct tape. The fact that he turned himself in, I mean, that may be because he didn't want a SWAT unit kicking in the door of his mother and grandmother's house. So I don't know that he gets much credit for turning himself in.
Could he say, I mean, if you really committed a murder, right? If you really murdered someone, you killed someone, and not an accidental overdose, why would you give the body over to authorities? Why would you turn yourself in? Why would you allow neighbors, strangers to get involved who can possibly catch you? Or you could say he's sloppy and he's stupid if these allegations are true.
Well, I think the truth may be somewhere in between. I suppose what he could say, or what the defense could say, is these individuals are drug users, they're drug addicts. As you said before, they struggle with addiction. A drug overdose occurred, and then Karen panicked and didn't know what to do. And it was an accidental drug overdose, and consequently, he wanted to get the body out of the house and figured the best place to bring it was a hospital. And what he ended up doing was just out of sheer desperation and panic rather than anything intentional. And he had nothing to do with the death, and instead it was just a drug overdose and then an unfortunate discarding of a body.
I always think the physical evidence tells a lot of the story, maybe sometimes provides a timeline. So if we look at those red-brown stains that were on the carpet, the couch, the door, how does that establish a timeline? How does that establish a cause of death? How does that establish a sequence of events?
Sure. So the medical examiner will be able to make some sort of rough determination as to exactly when the individual died, based upon a number of factors during an autopsy. And so if the reddish brown stains are in fact blood, I suppose it would depend on how much blood there is. I don't believe the search warrant specified exactly how much there was. Somebody who is hemorrhaging from a drug overdose could bleed in certain ways. They could fall, they could hit their head, they could bleed that way. On the other hand, if there are copious amounts of blood and there's an individual with significant, let's say, facial injuries and facial lacerations, then that sort of tips the scale from it being a drug overdose where somebody falls and hits their head to someone who unfortunately is beaten to death.
How do they confirm that's blood? Do you know what the testing is?
Well, they'll be able to confirm via DNA whether or not the blood belongs to Perry or the homeowner or Karen or somebody else. And as far as whether or not it is blood, there's a variety of forensic tests that can take place to do that. That's simple.
And this hockey mannequin, right, that they were apparently moving, they're going to be key witnesses at an upcoming trial, I imagine. What did you make of that? That was an interesting aspect because, yeah, they didn't definitively see a body. One saw maybe human flesh. One made a comment about this feels like a human body. But, hockey mannequin carrying this that time based on what prosecutors and authorities are saying. How do you interpret it?
Well, I mean, it's obvious that, again, if you believe what the police are saying, it's obvious that these folks are carrying a body. There's no two ways around that. Whether or not their offhand statements about do I see flesh or this feels like a body? Whether or not that's actually admissible at trial is another story altogether. But the fact of the matter is that two individuals, two neighbors helping out another neighbor, were carrying something that was, 100 and something pounds, that was shaped in a certain way, that was wrapped in a blanket, that the defendant claims is a mannequin. I think an inference can be drawn that they were carrying a body. I think the inference can be drawn they were carrying Perry's body. It certainly adds a gruesome element to it, but again, whether or not the statements as far as what they said comes in, that's another story entirely.
One thing I didn't ask you about was the rigor mortis, right? If the body, when it's dropped off at the hospital, they're able to, determine it's in this state, pronounced dead at 2:15 p.m. Can that help with the cause of death? Can that help with the timeline of death?
Sure. I mean, rigor mortis is one of the ways that rigor mortis is one of the ways that the medical examiner will determine exactly what the rough timeline of death was. But again, it's going to be a fine line here. The defense is clearly going to be that this was a drug overdose and that the defendant panicked and didn't know what else to do and got rid of the body. That's really the only line of defense here, as far as I can see.
So at this arraignment, at Karen's arraignment in Hingham District Court, Karen, who was wearing a gray long-sleeve shirt, often kind of stared at the floor as prosecutors were laying out the evidence against him. And he pleaded not guilty to murder. And the prosecutors, they detailed the severe injuries that Declan Perry apparently sustained, which led them, again, to classify this as a homicide. Here's what they say the medical examiner found.
The medical examiner found that he had deep hemorrhaging of his chest, back, and the back of his head from blunt force trauma. He had injuries to his eyes, nose, mouth, and face, also from blunt force trauma. He had injuries and hemorrhaging to his neck, larynx, and esophagus, hemorrhaging around his hyoid bone, and the medical examiner said all of these injuries to the neck were due to strangulation. All of these injuries, according to the medical examiner, occurred prior to death.
Now, following the arraignment, District Attorney Tim Cruz spoke to reporters about the ongoing investigation, that toxicology results are still pending, but he emphasized the severity of this case.
But at the end of the day, we had sufficient probable cause to charge this individual with arrest for homicide, for the unlawful killing of another human being with malice. The injuries that we have from preliminary medical examiner's report this time, and those are certainly very discerning, which led to us, amongst other things, regarding that this is a homicide and not just a drug overdose.
So, William, how influential are the medical examiner's findings in proving that injuries caused the death rather than drugs? Because, again, I think you're right. The defense may point to aspects of that and say that's the cause of death. But then you couple that with the injuries that this professional apparently found on the body and, right, the account of this woman who says, yeah, as we're moving the body, we never hit into anything, right? That wouldn't have been why the injuries were caused if we believe her.
Well, again, I think that's exactly the issue right there. I think this is going to be, if this case goes to trial, it will be dueling medical examiners, because the defense is going to have to get a medical examiner who's going to say that these injuries are consistent with someone who had died from a drug overdose, and then individuals who were then transporting that person from point A to point B. In this case, it was sort of up a crazy flight of stairs in a tub on a makeshift stretcher to a hospital, so on and so forth. So the defense medical examiner or the defense expert is going to say that these injuries were consistent with somebody who had already passed away and folks who were transporting a body, albeit ungracefully, from point A to point B. And the government is going to try to say that, no, these injuries clearly took place prior to the individual's death. So that's what this case boils down to.
Can you give me a little behind the scenes about something? And I wonder if our viewers will think this too. You're going to need an expert who's very specific in those findings. How does a defense attorney find an expert that will agree to all that? Is it like, this is where we want to go? Do you see it and just go to different medical experts until they find the one that fits?
No, I don't think that's the way. I don't think that's the way anyone should do it. I don't think that the defense attorney should drive the bus in terms of what the expert findings are. But again, in this particular case, it's clear, and there are experts out there that work for both prosecution and defense. And you retain an expert, you ask them to take a look at the findings, and you ask them what their conclusions are. If you get an expert whose conclusions don't help your client, then you thank them very much for their time, pay their bill, and find another expert if you can. It's routine. It happens all the time.
So, sorry, that was very That was very skeptical of me. That was very...
Not a problem.
What's the word that I'm trying to find? That was very jaded of me. That was very jaded of me. Let's say that. Okay.
A little cynical.
Little cynical. See, it's good. All these words are circulating. Okay, so we had Karen's attorney, by the way, who G. Mackis, who is pushing back against the government's evidence, issuing a statement saying, "We are confident that as the facts unfold in this case, this will be an example of the Massachusetts State Police jumping to conclusions and charging someone with murder when the evidence makes clear that what took place, while a tragedy, was not a crime." William, what does that mean?
I mean, they're foreshadowing a Karen Reed style defense, where once again the Massachusetts State Police charged somebody with murder, and they overshot significantly. That's exactly what this was. This is a shot across the bow to the Massachusetts State Police and the Plymouth County District Attorney's Office, essentially saying, there have been a lot of cases in Massachusetts and nationwide where the police act much too quickly, and the defense attorney is saying this is yet another one.
They can't argue that, though, in front of a jury, right? Hey, how many of you watched Karen Reed? This is another example of this. But one of the biggest trials to ever affect that state, you have to imagine. I actually wonder if they'll have to be asked at a trial like this. Did you ever watch the Karen Reed case? Do you have an opinion about the Massachusetts State Police? Am I thinking about it the wrong way?
No, I think whether or not you have an opinion about the Massachusetts State Police is certainly a relevant question to ask potential jurors in 2025 and 2026 and for a few years after that. Whether or not they follow the Karen Reed case, I think that's pushing the boundary a little bit.
Similar argument, though. You're 100% right. I thought the same thing. Now, Karen is scheduled to return to court on September 29th for a bail hearing. What can we expect there?
I think the district attorney's office is once again going to push that he continue to be held without bail. I think they're going to be successful in that argument. When an individual is charged with first-degree murder in Massachusetts, there is a presumption that they are going to be held without bail. I think it'd be, barring some fantastic new evidence that the defense team uncovers, I think it would be very difficult for him to be released while this case is pending.
William Korman, thank you so much for coming on, breaking it down for us. Really, really appreciate it. And for anybody who doesn't know, I sometimes struggle with pronunciations, and William helped me tremendously during the course of this episode. So thank you so much.
Always my pleasure.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.